Welcome back to the Lincoln Project. I'm your host, Reed Galen. Today, I'm joined by Tina Nguyen, national correspondent with Puck News. Prior to her time at Puck, Tina wrote for Mediaite, Vanity Fair, and Politico. Today, we are together in studio here in Washington, D.C. Tina, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. My gosh.
So you are, Puck has been around, a year and a half?
Yeah, we're about to hit our 2 year.
Yeah, and so, you guys cover politics, media, entertainment, the economy. You guys sort of captured all. A collection, I would say, of very well-established reporters who basically know the inside of everything all the time. I find it a useful resource. And so how's it going here 2 years in?
Oh, my God. I'm having the time of my life.
Oh, good.
I think one of the things that it's very unique about Puck is that it is the centers of all of these universes colliding with each other. So not only do you get a peek into these worlds that I've never really thought of before, entertainment. We just hired this woman, Lauren Sherman, who does deep dives into the fashion industry. Mm-hmm. Bill Cohen has been on Wall Street coverage for decades and is able to get Warren Buffett on the phone and be like, hey, can I interview you for my newsletter? And Warren's like, yeah, of course. But you also start seeing the ways that these worlds all intersect with each other. Right. So, for instance, Teddy Schleifer, who was our Silicon Valley correspondent and covered billionaires and their philanthropy efforts, was starting to dig into what SBF is doing. Got one of the very first interviews with SBF after
That's
he
Sam
was arrested.
Bankman-Fried,
yes,
the crypto dude.
Yes, and
soon to be federal inmate, I assume.
Yeah, exactly.
Or eventually, I should say, to be federal inmate.
High likelihood, very high likelihood.
Right.
Teddy actually got this crazy interview. I highly recommend people find it, where SBF has known Teddy for years, and Teddy was zeroing in on his philanthropy efforts back in 2019 when he was this nobody. Right. And so fast forward to when he's under house arrest in Palo Alto, SBF suddenly texts Teddy out of the blue and says, hey, do you want to come hang out with me? And Teddy's like, okay, sure. So he hops on this lift that very night to Palo Alto. SBF just brings him to his dining room. There are no lawyers. There are no PR agents. His parents are upstairs not paying attention to their son. It's just Teddy.
Maybe that was a theory. Maybe that's what we should have seen a little bit more of, not paying attention.
Not paying attention to your children who are giant national controversial figures.
Right.
It's just Teddy, Sam Bankman-Fried, a dog named Sandor, and Teddy gets this hour-long conversation with him about what he's doing right now, what he views the future of philanthropy to look like, altruistic philanthropy. And I'm just this is, my boss always says this is a tagline, but I'm kind of believing it to be true. It's the only kind of stuff you would see at Puck.
Well, listen, I mean, if you're going to have a 20-something guy who just moved out of the Bahamas back into his parents' house while he awaits trial, that's a very unique kind of thing. And I'm sure that Sam's attorneys were just beyond pleased.
I'm sure they were.
Teddy over. But let's talk about you. So you're covering, the political beat. You wrote a piece recently called "The Taliban 20s McCarthy To-Do List," and the reason why I bring up that piece is that last night, as we're recording this, the Republicans in the U.S. House passed their quote-unquote debt ceiling thing by, I think, 2 votes or 3 votes. Not many, the bare minimum that McCarthy could get. But the thrust of your story, and I think it's important for folks to understand this, was that I think you have Gates on the record saying we haven't gotten nearly enough for this hostage yet. And he's talking about the Speaker of the House of the United States, right?
Right.
He's not talking about some backbencher who's always intransigent. He's talking about the Speaker, but also the outside political forces working on these MAGA types. And also that for so many of these people, they code it in debt, right? That spending's out of control, et cetera, although they passed 3 debt ceiling increases under Trump, and Trump said you should never use this as a weapon, et cetera, et cetera. But it's an ideological fight, right? It is not what's good for the GDP to debt ratio of the United States. It's how much chaos can we create to make life harder for Joe Biden.
Absolutely. So let's dial back a couple of months ago when the speaker battle was going on. These 19 to 20 congressmen, representatives just come out of the woodwork and say, no, we will not let Kevin McCarthy become speaker. And they keep voting, and they keep voting, and they keep voting. And McCarthy suddenly realizes, okay, it's not just like 5 intransigents and I can pick off 1 or 2 of them. It is this united bloc that just came out of nowhere that had been organizing for months behind his back that he only learned about the morning of the election. That
McCarthy, true legislative strategist.
Yes, exactly. I actually did a piece on the Don Bacon, who is a representative who supported McCarthy.
From Nebraska.
Yes.
Don and I know each other well.
For real?
No, well, just on Twitter.
Okay. So in any case, he goes on front of the cameras and calls this group the Taliban 19 or the Taliban 20. And I'm like, that's actually kind of a perfect way to do it because they will literally hold things hostage and threaten to blow them up if they don't get their way. And
really speaks to most of the Republican Party at this point.
A meaningful minority, and the other ones just kind of go along with it.
Right.
Because otherwise their constituents, the MAGA ones, will start calling for blood.
Right.
So I talked to the people who organized this coup, essentially, and they were like, we have these demands. We have these very ideological demands.
Right.
Some of us really just don't like McCarthy. Some of us are, like, I called Matt Gaetz a MAGA sadist who just hates McCarthy by principle.
Right.
Then there are people like Chip Roy who want procedural things to go over in order to give the the small minority a say in Congress,
voice,
an outsized voice. Then there are people who wanted ideological things. There were people who were pissed off that McCarthy backed primary opponents against them that were more quote-unquote establishment. Right. And then when the MAGA candidates ended up winning, he just kind of backed off and went like, nope, okay, you just like twist in the wind, whatever. And they wanted McCarthy to stop interfering in primaries just so the MAGA candidate, by measure of being more extremist, would get a more diehard group of primary voters, bulldoze their way through the primary. Will they win the general election? Who knows? Just as long as the purest candidate is running.
Right. Because that's an important distinction, which is they don't even the voters don't even necessarily care if that candidate wins. They just want to make sure it's their candidate that is running, because if the candidate wins, great, and if the candidate loses, then great, we can kick the hell out of whoever wins, right? Because we really don't like governing anyway.
Yeah, limited government, Tea Party, everyone leave us alone, just like very MAGA this time.
Right.
So yeah, then the thing that is crucial to understanding what's going on here is that the 20 and McCarthy don't write down on paper exactly what it is that they agreed to. So the rest of the Republican caucus starts finding out when all of a sudden these things get done. Like, okay, Ralph Norman and these other guys are becoming chairs of committees.
Right.
All of a sudden the guy that McCarthy promises one thing to doesn't get the thing.
Right.
But
they stick around for it, right? When they find out, they're just like, because this is the thing is, McCarthy got to leadership like he was the minority whip and even the majority whip by dint of his ability to raise money. He's never been a good legislator. Whether or not it's Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Mitch McConnell, like these people know their conferences, right? Backward and forward. I was having dinner with my parents last night, right? My dad worked on the Hill for a million years. Like he was talking about how like Boehner had been a backbencher both in the minority and the majority, right? And so he understood his conference. He understood what they needed. Now, again, those were quote unquote reasonable people. Now, McCarthy's not dealing with reasonable people, but he's also invertebrate. Right. So he's going to take whatever the path of least resistance is to ultimately get those votes. And if that means he's got to screw over a bunch of guys that helped him out over the years, well, that's what he's going to do.
And if it means that he has to strap on a suicide vest in order to get Lauren Boebert's vote, then he'll do it.
Right.
One of the things that the 20 themselves kind of viewed as a shiny object but used as great leverage against McCarthy was that we will give you your votes if you allow us to lower the threshold for the motion to vacate vote. Now that means
they can kick the speaker out.
They can kick the speaker out. Right. And initially it's the threat of a motion to vacate vote was the thing that pushed Boehner out in 2015.
Right.
Nancy Pelosi comes in, kind of slips into an omnibus bill. Oh, if you want to pull a motion to vacate vote, you need half the conference.
Right.
And when McCarthy comes back in, the Republicans regain control of the House. The 20 go, all right, if you want, we want you to lower the threshold back down to one person.
Right.
So one person can stand up and be like, hey, I'd like to call a vote of no confidence on McCarthy just to kick him out.
Right.
And then that looks bad for McCarthy.
Because, of course, theoretically, all the Democrats would vote for that, and enough Republicans would vote for that, where then, of course, you'd be back into chaos.
Right.
Which, again, so many of these people, whether or not it's Gates or Boebert or Green, are perfectly happy with.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, they're agents of chaos. They don't, again, for them, and if you just as an aside, if you look at like every day now that Marjorie Taylor Greene is on the dais of a committee, she is saying something more awful, more disreputable, right? I mean, at one point she like literally lost, was it last week when she had the Homeland Security Secretary, she called him a liar. She doesn't even know the rules, and so she loses all her other time. Like she's not allowed to speak the rest of the hearing.
Right.
Because they don't care about the rules so much, they don't even know.
They don't care about the rules, and they can just like, all you really need at that point is just like the clip of Green calling herself a liar. Sorry,
Right.
my earpiece just fell out.
So let's fast forward now, because now we've got this debt ceiling thing, right? So the White House, President Biden were very, very clear. Like, we want a clean debt ceiling increase, which basically means the government's got to borrow more money, right? Got to sell more bonds to fund government operations, and we're not being held hostage on this. We're not going to negotiate spending cuts against it, because it was you guys who took Dad's black card to the club and ran up all the bills, and now you're asking us to pay for it. You know, cuts to veterans, services, cuts to SNAP benefits. What we used to call food stamps. But then you also see like Trump, and we'll get to him. You've seen this rhetoric now out of Trump, the Republicans, MAGA. I assume a lot of it's being pushed across Russia and everything else, which is like Biden's going to tank the economy. Biden's going to crash the economy. Biden's going to create a banking crisis because he won't agree to spending cuts. Like there's a very, very dialed in sort of rhetoric that they're using. But the truth is that like it's up to the House, ultimately to start this. But of course, it's all performative because it's not going to pass the Senate, and Biden wouldn't sign it anyway.
Right.
So now we're weeks away from a theoretical default. But even in this story you wrote, the outside group, is it CRA?
The Center for Renewing America.
Yeah, the Center for Renewing America. Like they don't even believe that default's a thing.
Right.
Right.
So the Center for Renewing America, I hope I got the name right on that one. That's an outside group run by Russ Vought, who used to be the director of the Office of Management and Budget
Right.
Under the Trump administration. And this guy is a NatCon diehard MAGA guy who does not believe in I would say programs that promote diversity initiatives. He believes that the federal government has been weaponized against conservatives, and the CRA is partnered with this thing called the Conservative Partnership Institute, which has turned
the Mark
into
Meadows operation.
the Mark Meadows operation.
Right.
The best way you could call it is like the MAGA version of the Heritage Foundation. They support candidates. They literally have this podcast for the junior members of Congress who came in under the MAGA banner.
They have a whole studio set
Yeah.
up, the whole thing. And remember, and I think it's always important when we talk about this Conservative Partnership Institute, this is the group that just bought a building on Capitol Hill, right?
Yes.
They bought some like 2,000-acre retreat on the eastern shore of Maryland to train people, right? Like, and that's the one thing, Tina, that's always fascinating. It's a little off topic, is how much money flows into these groups
Oh, for sure.
every year. Right, and what we don't understand about it, I think, too often is it's like, yes, it's political, it's social welfare money or charitable money, but the truth is it all promotes a political outcome that really the left. I mean, yeah, you mentioned the Center for American Progress and those sorts of groups, but they don't have nearly like, when you need, when the CPI needs something, when Meadows needs something, somebody strokes a check,
Right.
somebody sends a wire. right? And there's like the conservatives have really dialed in that flood of money that I think I'll call ourselves the pro-democracy movement, and I think the Democrats, who spend plenty of money, don't get me wrong, haven't understood about the front groups and how important they are to the conservative movement in this country.
Oh, absolutely. And the conservative movement also has groups in state governments, local governments, state legislatures. Literally go off to a camp called the American Legislative
Exchange
Council to do boot camps on legislation and how to do votes and stuff.
Remember, and all the anti-voting stuff in 21 came out of the Heritage Foundation, and there's video of the woman who runs, I don't know if it was this particular thing, who like either they sent the bills themselves to these legislatures, or they had what they called sentinels out in the states. They were basically cat's paws who brought this legislation to a given legislator in Arizona or wherever it was, and they introduced it. So there was a step away from the Heritage Foundation or whoever. So I mean, it's diabolical.
It's really dialed into a lot of civic institutions in America that I don't think that most Americans understand exist. If we want to go into my torrid backstory,
Sure.
The reason I have become like the quote unquote MAGA reporter is because when I was in college, I sort of like got looped into these conservative institutions. I literally was trained in conservative journalism camp to become a journalist and bring these ideas into the mainstream publications.
Sure.
Over time, I think people have realized that, at least donors have realized that it's not enough to send libertarian or conservative-leaning journalists into mainstream organizations so much as it is like create our own institutions, replace these dying local and state publications and newspapers, swoop in, create like these blogs, be like, we are reporters, we're going to go to the Wisconsin State Capitol. Also, aren't teacher unions bad? They're really, really bad. And I recall pretty distinctly that they pitch themselves to young people with things like scholarships, career development opportunities. If you are like a young, bright person, maybe not with a lot of money, but highly ambitious, you kind of go like, oh man, yeah, this sounds cool. I definitely want to like get a paid internship in journalism. And then
you get sort of sucked in.
Yeah, and then like 2 or 3 years later, you find yourself being like, well, I don't have any opportunities except this like right-wing blog out of Colorado that really wants me to write about how Jared Polis is bad. So I got out of that world, like kind of quit, moved to New York, wrote a food blog for like 3 years. Moved back into political writing through this blog called Mediaite. Ended up at Vanity Fair and was like, okay, you know what? I get to, do Christopher Hitchens type gonzo journalism stuff. This sounds great. Everything's going to be wonderful. And then Trump comes down the golden escalator literally the second day of my job. And as the conservative movement starts metastasizing from Tea Party, libertarianism, free marketeering to populist, nativist, nationalist, isolationist rhetoric, I start seeing the movement that I used to be part of start being pulled in that direction. And I'm literally working in the mainstream media at this point. So everyone's like, what the hell is going on here? And all of a sudden they're like, my boss is like, Tiana, why do you keep talking about Steve Bannon and Breitbart? And like, how do you know these people? Hey, can you write about these people? And then yada, yada, yada. And now I'm the MAGA reporter.
So, it's interesting just to talk about the media for a second because, there's obviously Fox has been in the news a lot because they can Tucker Carlson. But it's not just Fox, it's OANN, it's the Right Side Broadcast Network, Dan Bongino, all these podcasts that pop up like, mushrooms after a rainstorm. Sinclair, buys up all these local radio stations. Salem, Communications buys up all these radio stations. Elon Musk buys Twitter, The conservative movement, such as it is on the march in American media and doesn't look like many people are trying to stop them.
I mean, here's the thing, is that if you listen to conservative media, they do make a good point about how the flow of information comes from a bunch of very powerful institutions, primarily based in New York at this point, that control the flow of information. So things like, obviously, the New York Times, whatever, those are freestanding publications. But things like Google, which hosts these services, DirecTV, which carries these web shows, that carries these cable networks, they are easily pressured by outside liberal groups to drop these networks, to drop these conservative outlets. So Breitbart, for instance, back in 2017, seemed like it was going to be ascendant. Steve Bannon left Breitbart to go to the White House. Right. There was all this hullabaloo about like Breitbart's now going legitimate. Breitbart's now going to be a conservative publication that holds the libs accountable. And then a group called Sleeping Giants started running this campaign pressuring Google to drop their programmatic advertising on the site. So Breitbart had been relying on Google to funnel ad dollars towards them. So this campaign group starts hitting up all of the blue chip advertisers, Ford, Hermes, whatever. The people with money, they start saying, hey, your stuff's appearing on Breitbart, this quote unquote white nationalist site. You got to take it down. And they start taking it down. And it really pummels Breitbart in the face. And
I'm not going to feel bad about that. I just need you to know.
You're free to feel that way. This is just how everything unfolded.
Right.
And that is sort of the same thing that's what happened to Tucker Carlson just now. Just for full disclosure, I used to work at the Daily Caller between sometime in 2011, 2012.
Right.
And he was my boss back then.
Yeah.
But I do kind of take that experience and use it to look at what's happening here, which is that the reason Wall Street Journal, New York Times is reporting this, one of the many reasons that Fox took Tucker off the air is that he may have had a giant audience, like the biggest audience in cable news, the most, and had arguably the most influence in the current Republican Party.
Right.
The thing is that his rhetoric and his coverage and all of the content of his show was so inflammatory, controversial, what have you, that the advertisers that would have paid Fox money for that giant audience were like, nope, we really don't want to air Ford F-150 ads next to Tucker Carlson.
So it's Gold, bomb shelters, the My Pillow guy, Patriot Mobile, right? They're not mainstream advertisers.
They're not mainstream advertisers, and they really don't have the money to justify keeping Tucker on the air. So Tucker's Carlson Tonight becomes a money pit. Fox is like, oh, well, he's the most popular guy on TV. We can't really get rid of him, but we're losing money on this guy. Yeah. And then, according to the Wall Street Journal, all of these texts come out in the Dominion case, and they're like, oh man, now it's time to fire Tucker. I'm coming out with a story on this that should publish on Thursday, but I can tell you so far that the Tucker camp has a very different view on how things went down, and that view is going to dictate the new arc of Tucker's career. Read this at puck.news when it comes out, guys.
Well, and he put out a video last night that was 2 minutes and 15 seconds. Basically, what I found about the language was it was dog whistle laden. Normally he's a bullhorn guy, but in this video he's very intentionally just using the dog whistles.
Oh yeah.
Right? He's talking about freedom and, demographic change, but he uses these very sort of anodyne words when up until Monday, or Friday night, I guess, he would use all of the words out loud. And it was an interesting transformation to see. I heard one story that said, it was about editorial control. I mean, what editorial control was there? What line didn't he cross? Right? The idea of editorial control on Tucker up until Friday night was a farce. There was no editorial control there, because I have to assume that Fox Legal at some point watched the show every night and were just like, oh God, oh God, oh God. But I think there's also the part too, you talk about It's ultimately a business decision, right? It's Rupert's radio station.
Right.
Tucker Carlson's a DJ in Afternoon Drive. You know what? The DJ gets canned. The guy still owns the radio station.
Right. So let me put on my MAGA Viking hat for a second
please.
to translate what the dog whistle you're talking about means to the audience that Tucker's cultivated.
Please, yeah.
Everyone I've talked to who's like involved in the MAGA media industry, they believe that Tucker could easily take away 20 to 30% of Fox's audience because the only reason that a giant section of MAGA paid attention to Fox was because of Tucker. The reason that people started subscribing for Fox Nation, their streaming service, was because Tucker put these documentaries on there. And
which were weird. A lot of them were weird.
Yeah, I think the last one that they were promoting was like, oh no, people want to eat bugs. Oh no.
Right.
But the reason that people went to Fox just for Tucker was because they're like, this is the only guy who, quote unquote, says it as it is.
He says the things we're all thinking about.
Right,
I've
exactly.
heard that a million times in the last 3 days.
Oh, for sure. And he also provided a contrast to Hannity, to Laura Ingraham, primarily Hannity, and I think as one person,
because Sean Hannity's like the what I, pardon my French, but like what I used to call when I lived here in Washington, D.C., the FUMU principle, like fuck up, move up. Like this guy has no business whatsoever with a primetime show anywhere. He should be like a local DJ in you know, Pittsfield, Massachusetts, right? Like bothering the locals and no one else.
The way that one person described it to me close to Tucker was Hannity, like the current Fox lineup is quote unquote boomer slop. So it targets an older demographic.
It's really smart. Yeah.
An older demographic that is kind of traditionally Republican.
Right.
Will probably tune out at Fox after Hannity or whatever.
Right.
Tucker's audience is primarily younger, more MAGA, under 55, a demographic that Fox was really trying to capture. But the thing is that under 55 demographic is like Trumpy and MAGA-y, for lack of a better term. And so what Tucker is trying to do right now is to play into that audience, tap into that disaffection they have with quote unquote mainstream media. Ultimately, Fox News is a media company that's run out of New York City by a billionaire. Just like those three factors alone is enough for those MAGA voters to just like drop Fox completely and go over to wherever it is Tucker ends up going.
And you saw it on social media, you know, Never Fox. They gave into the woke brigade. You know, Marjorie Taylor Greene says, I'll follow Tucker anywhere. But I think your point about who was watching this is really important because I have family where Fox is on all day. Right. It's on all day in the house. It's background noise. Right. And they would watch Tucker, but they weren't. Again, it was a little much for them. These are people who were mainstream conservatives and are sort of now like in the wake of MAGA. Right. They sort of follow the wake. But the thing, and I think this is really important, is the people you're talking about with Tucker are Gen Xers. Probably a lot of them who are college educated, professionals, probably pretty high income demographics. And I think this is one thing as a proud Gen Xer myself is these are people like me. And they're tuning into Tucker, and they the more he'll dish them, the more they'll scoop it up.
Right. I think the video itself, as of this morning, had 12.7 million views.
Right.
And another point that people made to me was that,
and that's just the ones we can see.
Right, exactly. Who knows what other people have like clipped it, covered it, put it on their websites,
or their Telegram channels, or whatever.
Written it up, tweeted out like tiny snippets of it. That is an exponential number of eyeballs. Like, yeah, cool. 3 million people watch Tucker every night on Fox. Cable is a dying medium. 3 million people is like, if that was a broadcast show in the 90s, that show would get canned immediately. Right. So, but they were like, okay, 3 million people are watching Tucker here. Millions and millions more are watching Tucker's monologue every night on YouTube. That is a metric you should be paying attention to.
And I want to say this is that the conservative media outlets, I feel like, have really, and I'm going to use this word intentionally, have weaponized that sort of clipping and sharing stuff far better than anybody well, there is no opposition to it.
There
right?
really is no
They
opposition
have
to
that
it.
field to themselves, and because they're so networked in ways that you probably understand even better than I do, because remember when I was a Republican, like I was a rhino, proud rhino, right? The conservatives, like, because I was never a conservative, I was a Republican, they scared me, right? Like Gary with the red tie and the crazy eyes, he was at the table, but like Gary scared everybody. Gary's in charge now, right? And so like we don't, like those, I'm going to call them subterranean,
Internet people.
networks, yeah, because normal people, humans, don't see it, but this movement does. And that's where they get everything. And that's why they're so they're so in, I don't know what's the word, they're so in the bubble all the time, right? So for example, when Fox settled with Dominion, Joe Trippi, senior advisor of the Lincoln Project, was having a beer with a buddy of his who happens to be a bad guy, had no idea. Trygve Olsen, senior advisor of ours, his mom, Western Wisconsin, MAGA person, had no idea. But here's the thing, Fox can't hide this one.
Right.
Right? They could hide Dominion. They can't hide firing Tucker.
Right. That was a dangerous move for them.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how it is they'll be able to retain that audience.
Right.
If I know Tucker, and I think I understand him pretty well at this point, he doesn't really need this. He doesn't really need the money.
Yeah.
It'd be nice for him to have the money.
Right.
He would prefer his megaphone,
Yeah.
which is why you saw him be so cagey in that video. Like, from all the reporting I've seen so far, his contract runs out in 2024. I don't know how much Fox will be able to prevent him from saying anything.
Right.
I imagine right now behind the scenes, they're really, really trying to get him to sign an NDA, sign a non-disparagement agreement, not be able to run out there and tell his entire audience, Fox is so bad that you need to drop Fox,
Right.
you need to cut cable, follow me to,
Wherever.
I don't know, Rumble or whatever.
Right.
I can safely say that he's probably not going to go to like Newsmax or OAN because OAN doesn't have the carriage.
Right.
It's not carried by as many
Cable systems, yeah.
so people would have to pay a premium to go to OAN. I don't think OAN could match or go better than Tucker's salary,
Right.
and they'd have to pay him way, 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 way more
Right.
in order for him to have like a tinier audience. Which why would you?
Right.
And I kind of see the same for Newsmax. It's just kind of too small and doesn't have the same production value that Tucker is able to command.
Right, but there are plenty, there's Daily Wire, there's, what's his name, The Blaze, right? There are other people out there.
There are other people out there, but also Tucker's brand, his own personal brand, is as big, if not bigger, than those companies.
All of these people, yeah.
And why would he want to be an employee of theirs at this point? Why would he want to have someone else control what it is he's saying? He had struggles within Fox because of this editorial control issue.
Yeah.
Why would he want to repeat that with another network that is trying to make money off of him?
Right. Well, and thinking about MAGA, Tucker's the Tribune, right? Trump is the leader, right? And those two things are symbiotic, but they're not necessarily always in line with one another, right? Which we know Tucker hates Trump. Now, he bent the knee a couple of weeks ago when he had to, right? Because that's where his audience was. Like, so he's willing to do that. But we know, Tucker's not a dumb guy, right? Like, he knows what Trump is. He knows what he does every night, and he does it anyway. But, he had to bend the knee. And the thing is that he's going to have, now maybe he has transformed and now he really believes this stuff. I don't know. But even if he doesn't believe it, he's still going to have to do it because, to your point, like, that's where his audience is. And his audience is pretty Trumpy, right? They're pretty MAGA. And Trump, I think the MAGA movement, as I've said previously on the show, has moved past Trump. It's crazier than he is now, and you can see him trying to catch up with it. And you can see evidence of this, I think, in a lot of these state legislatures and everything else. But how does that relationship work now? Because they're good, as bad as I believe they are for the country and the world, they're good for each other.
For sure. one of the things that I keep hearing every time I talk to anyone about Tucker is that the Republican Party needed Tucker and they needed his 8 p.m. platform in order to speak to a Republican audience.
Yeah.
Trump also, depending on how well Tucker can retain that audience going forward, Republicans will try to follow Tucker's audience as well. Trump will try to follow Tucker's audience. It's more of a symbiotic relationship than anything. If you remember back in 2020, Tucker was one of the first people to say, hey, COVID's bad. We should take it seriously. You should stop being so cavalier about it, Trump. And then Trump listened, and a story came out about Tucker literally traveling to Mar-a-Lago to have dinner.
Stop it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll say this about the MAGA movement. They have ideals, and they view Trump as an imperfect avatar of them. They don't really like how he kind of goes back and forth on things, but they also view him as a deal maker, and in order to get certain principles of theirs passed, they're willing to put up with a couple of step backs in legislative priorities, executive priorities, whatever, in order to get what it is they want most passed. So they're like, all right, sure, we'll pass a bigger debt ceiling, but we need that wall, man. We need you to close those borders. We need you to get out of the Iran deal, nuclear deal. People like DeSantis, I think one of the reasons that you're seeing DeSantis fall in the polls right now, sure, he's more of a purist. Sure, he's trying to enact a specific culture war vision in Florida. The initial wave of him being popular was that he was able to, de-wokeify schools and fight against Disney. But the fact
but also he was credentialed.
Yeah, he was credentialed.
Right.
He was a strong he was a strong executive.
But he also had Harvard, he had Yale, he had the Navy, right? Good-looking family. But the difference between them is aesthetic. It's not substantive.
It's aesthetic. It's absolutely aesthetic.
Right.
And MAGA is very aesthetic.
Yeah.
MAGA really cares about image, and they care about virality, and they care the most about personality.
Yeah.
And DeSantis has not been presenting himself as a fighter to the extent that Trump is.
But this is the thing I think is a huge point, and I think that both Trump and Carlson have this, which is they understand it's a show. Trump goes on stage and he's giving you a show.
Right.
Right? The MAGAs love the show. Why is it that DeSantis has so many other problems as a candidate aside from the MAGA stuff, just in his, but you see even with Nikki Haley, right? I mean, her rollout event, right? When she launched for her president, I set that event up in 1999 in Iowa for George W. Bush, right? That's not what their voters want. It's why they're willing to put up with Trump doing a goofy dance to YMCA, because it's a show. Carlson gives them a show. They're not politicians. These other people, even DeSantis, as awful as he is and the way that he's running Florida, is a conventional politician, right? The Tucker primary demanded he say something bad about Ukraine. He says something bad about Ukraine.
Right.
The donors, his big donors, who are all globalists because they live in New York, right, are like, you can't say that, and he walks it back. Trump would never walk it back. He doesn't care.
Exactly. And DeSantis doing all of the MAGA policies, but then at the crucial moment when it appears that Trump is going to be indicted, hitting him about taking money from a porn star. The first thing a lot of my sources did, even the ones who were pro DeSantis, but had a really good line into the MAGA mindset, they hit me up and they're like, that was the worst thing DeSantis could have done. And I'm like, wait, what? And they're like, yeah. So what he could have done was stand up for MAGA principle and say, look, I'm going to put aside my petty differences with Trump. Here's I will try to prevent him from being arrested. Legally he probably can't.
Right.
Actually, he definitely can't. The Constitution says he can't.
Right.
But it's all about the posture. It is all about the show of magnanimity. Yeah. The show of I will put aside my petty differences in order to protect this principle. He probably would have come out ahead if he had done that. Instead, he goes, not my problem. Also, you know what? He may have given money to a porn star. I couldn't have possibly ever know anything about that. And that made him look petty. That made him look weak. And that made him look like he was just kind of faking the MAGA in order to get away.
Well, one, he's a cynic. He is faking the MAGA. Two, he is petty. And three, he is weak. So those things, that's a perfect example of who, I mean, the thing about running for president, and he's, if he hasn't learned this yet, and it doesn't sound like he has, is that there are no shadows left, right? There's no place to hide when you decide to do this. Now, it sounds like, based on reporting, that he's going to launch an exploratory campaign sometime next month, right, middle of next month, after the Florida legislative session is over. But like, when you run for president, no place to hide, right? And this is one of those things that I think is so indicative of the Republican Party today. It's what I call, look, they've all made the deal with the devil. Now, you can decide whether or not you want Trump to be the devil, or if he revealed the devil or whatever. But here's the thing, is to run against Trump, you have to basically be completely anti-Trump. There's no middle ground. You're either, if you're totally with him, then why are you running?
Right.
And if you're like, oh, I like his policies, but I don't like him, not enough.
Right.
Right? Not enough. Again, still, why are you doing this? Because you can make an argument, again, I probably would, that his policies weren't very good either. DeSantis has made the fatal flaw, one that, again, like they all do. And I think it was a guy named Peter Shale in Florida, longtime Democrat, or Steve Shale, excuse me, longtime Democratic consultant down there. And I don't know if it was y'all's story or somebody else's story, but, you know, can DeSantis beat Trump? And he's like, I don't think they even have the brain to be able to do that. And that's what we say too, is like, you have to fight Trump in 3, 4, 5 dimensions. These people are all conventional in their own ways. And like the pudding ad that Trump put out, right, as ridiculous as it is, like, there's a reason they did it. There's a reason they did it that way. And the DeSantis people couldn't in a million years, the Haley people, the Scott people, the Pence people couldn't in a million years figure out how to do that, because they don't own the chip, right? They haven't had the chip, because what they don't understand is, like, the game that we're in is not the game of 1999 or even 2014.
Or even 2020, honestly.
Right, or even 2020. And so for a guy like DeSantis, like, he's got to make a choice, which is he either backs down completely or you're going to fly straight into the propeller.
Right.
And he's chosen to fly into the propeller, which will probably be, you know, his reward will be 3.5 more years in Tallahassee, which I doubt he really wants.
And my colleague Tara Palmieri was actually doing this story about whether the Florida legislators who were willing to sign through his agenda are getting kind of tired of him
I've heard
running
that
for
too.
president, running for fake president. I don't know how to put whatever he's doing right now. Cosplaying as president.
Right. But he's the guy that paid for the cheap costume, right? Like, he didn't go out and get the real Stormtrooper outfit. He got the one like you would have gotten in a box in the 80s, right? It was like a weird plastic mask and, like, basically a garbage bag that painted like a Stormtrooper.
No, if you want the real version, you have to go to Lucasfilm and pay like $1 million for the first one that was ever worn.
And he's not doing that.
Probably not, no. Okay, so this is my big brain, galaxy brain analysis of it. I think the reason that DeSantis won with such a giant margin in 2020 was because he smartly understood the battleground he was playing on in Florida, which is an entire state that is so grateful that he had life be normal during COVID.
Right.
And I think that is the record he's been running on. I was at the Heritage Foundation Leadership Summit last Friday or so, and he gave a speech there, and most of it was, I stood up against Anthony Fauci, I kept Florida open, I'm making sure that these woke children aren't learning about gay stuff up till 3rd grade. That was acceptable to Florida parents. Being able to put their children in school was acceptable to Florida parents. Like, doing the bare minimum to replicate normal life.
Right.
Huge, absolutely huge. If you are thinking in like post-traumatic COVID fear disorder 2021, 2022.
Right.
That seems to be over now.
Well, also, this didn't occur in a vacuum. He also ran against a guy who's the 31 flavors of Florida politics. Charlie Crist had literally been everything to everybody. He's beyond old, right? He wasn't a good candidate. The Florida Democratic Party, there's more of us in this room, and there's only 2 of us than there are in the Florida Democratic Party at this point. So, like, it wasn't exactly, like, stiff competition either.
Right, exactly. So if he is not able to articulate a future that he can enact, and if Disney keeps kicking his ass in the most embarrassing ways,
right. Which I think they will continue to do.
They're very good at, like, look, if you're going up against Disney, you're going to have to realize, one, they have so many lawyers. Two,
Right.
they have so much money. Three, they understand media because they are the media.
Yeah.
And
They own everything.
They own everything. And DeSantis owns Florida, but, like, he's running for president of the entire country.
Right.
So he's...
But that parochialism is not, I mean, it's not unusual. I got asked a question when I recorded on Monday about, like, why is DeSantis in Israel today? Why was DeSantis in Japan? Because he's trying, and look, this is not an unusual thing. Remember the speech Obama gave in Berlin, right? These guys, mostly guys and gals, want to be seen as standing on the international stage, that they can stand there and be the president. The problem is that if you can't make the case at home, flying to Tokyo, flying to Tel Aviv ain't going to do it either.
Yeah, that bobblehead moment with the gaping mouth, like, when we go back to the showmanship, American voters, we're very good at taking one moment where the person looks kind of embarrassing and weak and then blowing it up to define that person's life forever, like the Marco Rubio water bottle incident.
Look, I mean,
say that everyone remembers what that was.
I mean, think about, George H.W. Bush looking at his watch, Michael Dukakis in the tank. John Kerry had several. But when he's in the radiation suit, right, or when he's windsurfing, I mean, how much currency do we get out of the windsurfing video, right?
Right.
And so yes, but that's the point. I mean, Howard Dean. But that's the point. Is like, yes, but see, that's the difference. Is Trump can do all that stuff and he gets away with it because he doesn't care,
right?
And his people don't care. DeSantis can't get away with it because the prism that people see him through is quote unquote normal, right? Nobody thinks Trump's normal,
right?
So he isn't judged by those standards. Nobody thinks Tucker's normal anymore either, right? So he doesn't get judged by I mean, this is a guy who had one of his Fox Nation show was all about ball tanning or something crazy, right? Like the guy's gone off the deep end on some of this stuff. But DeSantis doesn't get that discount rate on his behavior or how he acts politically because, frankly, he's, up until he decided to go half-cocked on MAGA, he was a relatively speaking normal guy.
For sure. Like, even, vague Tea Party-esque guy maybe would have cut it, but probably not anymore. Like, the fact that he has, two congressional endorsements right now, Chip Roy and Thomas Massey, and actually Laurel Lee. I forgot about her, but she's a Florida.
Yeah.
She was the former Secretary of State under DeSantis. Of course, she's going to endorse him. Massey and Chip Roy, for all of their MAGA tendencies, all of their libertarian small government tendencies, are known as wonks. The optics,
they're also goons. They really are. They are goons.
Okay.
I mean, Chip Roy is was Ted Cruz's chief of staff, right? And Thomas Massey's one of those guys with all the guns and his kids in the Christmas card.
But in any case, but the optics of Trump going into DeSantis's home turf and hoovering up anyone who could have supported DeSantis, who could have given him that validation of, yes, he was a great person in my congressional he was a
class,
great
right.
Congressman when we served with him. He was a fantastic governor and helped us push our agenda. No, they're not saying that. They're like Trump is the best leader. We should follow him and not the guy that we actually know and worked with so well.
But let's talk about that a little bit because I was having coffee with a friend of mine this morning, and this is something that we've been talking about, Rick. Rick and I in particular, but Stu and Joe and everybody else at the team is this Trump campaign is different. Right? 16 was 4 idiots in an airplane, right? 2020 was the entire operation of the White House, the campaign, every other thing. And as disastrous as his presidency was, and as disastrous as that campaign was, he still only lost by 150,000 votes in the target states. Now he's got two very smart people running the operation. And it looks like they've made some kind of deal with him, Tina, where it's look, you go do whatever you do.
Right.
You don't care about this stuff anyway, right? You don't care about the campaign. You just want to know two things. Is the money coming in And are you stealing it from me? And if the answer to the first is yes, and if the answer to the second is no, just let us do our thing, and you go do your thing. And so far, again, this is why I don't think we should underestimate him next year. And I do think he is the presumptive nominee. This is a different operation. We should take it seriously.
Yeah, like it is so surprisingly disciplined.
Yeah.
And the things that Trump is doing right now were things that he was not doing in 2016, not doing in 2020. Like he's going to McDonald's counters and shaking people's hands.
Right.
2016 and 2020, obviously 2020 you couldn't shake anyone's hand, but in 2016, like he was known for rallies, he was known for big televised events, he was known for tweeting, and that was so counterintuitive to what every other
all
politician
of us were used to.
Yeah. Like this time he's the one in diners in Iowa, but DeSantis has a reputation for being really, really, really bad at retail politics and can't shake people's hands or like even look them in the eye. So like that's actually a pretty smart move on the Trump campaign's part. Like remind everyone that Trump is charismatic and a human being.
But also, again,
but he is very charismatic.
But to your point, you brought up about the Florida members of Congress. Like that didn't just happen, right? Susie Wiles and Chris LaCivita orchestrated that, right? The guy who, I don't think he was a Florida guy. I think maybe he was from Kentucky or Texas, one of them, right? In that DeSantis comes to Washington, D.C., meets with a bunch of Republican members of Congress. This guy comes out and says, I just met with Ron DeSantis. He's a great guy. By the way, Trump 2024.
Yeah.
Like, how humiliating.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think the way that Trump Insider put it to Rolling Stone was kind of brilliant. They were like, we are doing a mind fuck. This is like, this is a mind fuck. We are trying to get DeSantis to look like a fucking idiot. And
which is what we did to Trump. And we try and do to Trump in 2020.
Yeah. I think they must have taken a page out of your playbook.
Many people have, and we certainly, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. So,
yeah, right now, I don't know if DeSantis has the, what was it that Machiavelli said? The cunning to match that public humiliation. Everything leading up to right now, I have been hearing out of Trump world, I've been hearing out of MAGA world that it would be best, their position is it would be best for DeSantis to step down and support Trump this cycle so he can run in 2028. Otherwise, we're going to torch his reputation to the ground and take all of his political capital and leave him looking like a pudding finger torture lawyer.
Right. Pudding finger torture lawyer. Rob, clip that.
Can DeSantis outmaneuver Trump on the public stage, or will he hide behind Christina Pushaw tweeting mean things out on his behalf?
But see, I'm glad you brought that up, because this is the difference between this, is that when you attack Trump personally, he responds personally.
Right.
Right? It's not like the old days when, we did an oppo drop, when I worked for McCain, we did an oppo drop on Romney with the dog on the car.
Right.
Right. And then, that got Romney personally tied up. But then, the Romney campaign drops oppo on McCain. And it's like the rapid response guys going back and forth all day. Right. Trying to get a hit in. This is like, but Romney, again, he's going to talk, he was a lovely dog or whatever. But if Christina Pushaw goes after Donald Trump, Donald Trump will attack Christina Pushaw.
Oh, yeah.
Right? He won't attack Ron DeSantis. Right? He'll go, she's crazy, she was in Belarus or whatever else, she got thrown out of the governor. He'll find something terrible to say, right, about her, and then his people will all pile on her individually. And that's not what most staffers have signed up for.
No, not at all.
Right?
Most staffers aren't signed up for that. He'll go after journalists. The dude is literally standing trial against an accusation of rape.
Right.
And an Emerson poll dropped this morning saying this is the first time Trump has broken 55% of support. It's 63% of support? DeSantis has dropped down to 16 from 25. He's still popular. People will follow Trump to the ends of the earth as long as they view him as being persecuted by the deep state. DeSantis does not have that deep state credibility against him.
Well, he is the deep state.
Yeah,
He
exactly.
was the deep state, right? As being the torture
Galaxy
guy.
brain.
The torture guy.
Yeah.
And so now look, again, we've got Nikki Haley in the race. Tim Scott is doing something. I don't know what we'd call it. I don't think it's a campaign, but he's doing something. Pompeo's out. Pence is sort of still floating out there. It sounds like DeSantis is going to start, again, exploring this thing
Right.
Next month. So, we were a little bit concerned, candidly, like that this thing would be over like in June. Doesn't look like that'll be, right? But Trump's already saying, like, nobody asked me about debates, right? So he's already sort of putting out there, like, why would I even stand on the stage with these people? And if he's not there, like, other people will watch, but does it mean anything? Remember right before Iowa in 2020, or 2016, excuse me, remember, like, there was a debate, and then he went across the street and did something for veterans, which, of course, it turns out, I don't know if they ever actually raised money for them. But the point is that he's going to play by his own rules, and the rest of them have to sort of account for it.
Although, honestly, do you think Ron DeSantis wants to go up against Donald Trump on a stage where Trump can probably just, like, play with him like a cat toy?
Certainly not.
Yeah.
Certainly not, because, I mean, that's the other part, too, is... And I don't know if this is a symptom of Trumpism within the GOP or whatever. None of these people are very good politicians. Like, they're not very good. They're not charismatic. I mean, Trump has charisma. It's a twisted charisma, but it exists. The rest of these people are not charismatic. And the problem is that they all live, in the eclipse of Trump's shadow, right? And to get out of that, you have to be crazier than he is, which I think DeSantis has tried to do, but you can't really. Again, I always call it's like Google Translate, right? Trump is the native speaker. DeSantis speaks through the translator, and the people know it. They know it's not his native language, right? Because you can't. He's the alpha and the omega of Trumpism, right? Like, he's the only one that really knows how to speak it natively.
Right. Although the funny thing is that, like, the people who he does gravitate towards are either super charismatic, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who has somehow made most Republicans in Congress love her because she's just so nice.
She's the second most powerful person in the Republican conference.
Oh, for sure. And then during the 2020 campaign, he was backing people like Dr. Oz, who knew how to perform in front of a camera, and Carrie Lake, who was a former television broadcaster. Like, these are the people that Trump sees as his heirs.
Yeah.
People who can say the right MAGA things and look good doing it.
Right. Well, I mean, so let's do this. So, here we are. It's the end of April 2023. We're 18 months or so to Election Day 2024. Give us your sort of next 90 to 120 days. How does the summer roll out in your mind?
Trump does a bunch of campaigns, occasionally goes back to New York, puts on a couple of shows. I mean, like, perp walks and looking like he's being, like...
persecuted, yeah.
Persecuted. DeSantis goes out and tries to capture the MAGA magic somehow. I'm not quite sure what that looks like, especially since his desire to court MAGA people is not working. Yeah. His desire to look like a strong anti-Trump candidate and the sane alternative to him is not working. Right. Maybe there's a magical Republican person out there.
Asa Hutchinson, the former governor of Arkansas, who no one knows. Seems like all things considered, is more decent than the rest of them, but what does that even mean?
I don't know. Weirder things have happened in the past 8 years.
That's for sure.
Tim Scott, Nikki Haley, they do whatever. A giant underground retail politics operation maybe goes on in the primary states, and hopefully as Trump goes off and does all of his, trumping, that might be a possible firewall against him. Yeah. We'll see how effective that is. Yeah. Tucker Carlson dances around whatever legal NDA legal battle is going on between his team and Fox News's team. We don't particularly know what happens to Tucker in the next couple of months, but I imagine he's going to try to find some way to come back.
Yeah.
And watching whatever Tucker does is pretty crucial to understanding what it is the Republican Party does. Because Tucker has the biggest audience. Tucker can define people's political views and political choices more than anyone
political
else.
Careers.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, think about it. This is a guy who single-handedly wrecked Ted Cruz, right, a year and a half ago or whatever it was.
Oh yeah, it was on. That was when
He said it was a riot.
He said it was a riot. Tucker brings him on his show and goes, "How dare you call these patriots rioters?" And,
right, and Cruz is abasing himself, right, bowing down before Tucker, and Tucker goes, "You're a Supreme Court lawyer, Ted. You know what you said, and you said it on purpose." And just beating Cruz about the head and neck with a truncheon, right?
yeah.
And like, goodbye.
Here's the thing about Tucker that a lot of people don't understand. Okay, you look at him and you're like, oh my God, you were on like mainstream cable. You were on like...
He's done the full Carlson.
Yeah.
He's the only guy fired by all three networks.
Exactly. That actually looks really good for him.
Right.
Because that means that like he tried to do the cable news thing. They fired him. It's because he was speaking was speaking the truth too much.
He's telling you the truth and they won't have it. He even basically said that.
Right, exactly. And if he can't do it on Fox, then like what hope is there for America if Tucker Carlson, the guy who's been speaking it as it is being silenced by the mainstream media? And now Fox could be lumped into quote unquote the mainstream media now.
Right.
And he genuinely believes this.
Yeah.
Like I think it's a mistake when people look at Tucker and think, oh, you went to prep school. Oh, your mother is an heiress. That's actually his stepmother.
Right.
His actual mother, this isn't a biography of his. His actual mother was like the San Francisco hippie who abandoned her kids early on. And his father was a broadcaster who wasn't making that much money. That puts a chip on your shoulder for sure.
Do you think maybe if we'd gotten some therapy, early on, maybe we would have avoided all of this?
What
it's like if they'd let Hitler into the Art Academy, what would have been different, right?
Oh my God. Yeah, let's throw some therapy at Tucker. Let's see how that works out.
Right.
What's better? But like the thing is now he has power. He has a giant megaphone. He's able to define a lot of people's views.
Right.
Like that's power, man.
Yeah.
Like
and that's what he wants.
That's who wouldn't want that power though?
Right. Well, this has been fascinating. Before we let you go, where can our listeners and our viewers today find you online?
So I barely tweet, but it's Tina_Nguyen. My Instagram is the last Nguyen. I tend to be more of a like silly person there. My actual work is at puck.news. And yeah, subscribe to Puck, man. We are doing some fun things, and I don't know, like I enjoy being there. I enjoy living in the Puck world, and hopefully all of you do too. All
right, absolutely. As always, gang, you can find me on Twitter and TikTok at Reed Galen, on Instagram at Reed_Galen_LP. Tina Nguyen, thank you for joining me, and everybody else, we'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.